You are now watching day 4 of Gŵyl Haf. Today I'd like to get straight into talking about our events for today. So first of all, we had Tija Jin, who is the community manager at Tilted Access Press. Tilted Access Press are a publisher I've followed for so long, ever since I think the first one I read of theirs was Hamid Ismailov's book and the Devil's Dance, and that just got me rolling really. And so they publish mostly from Asia, and all entirely in translation, and Tija and I just had a lovely time, and we sort of chat a bit about how Tilted Access works, how they find their books, how Deborah Smith started them, and then a little bit about how they are trying to decolonise their little corner of the translation world and of the publishing world, and how for them that looks like connecting with the countries that they have connections with as a team, and how it looks to publish some quite radical work and some really exciting work, one of which includes Sergius Meeks Bacchus by Norman Erickson Passeribu and translated by Tiffany Sal, which is coming up on Friday you'll be watching that, I think. So that's a really good interview. And yeah, they're just wonderful. Tija's wonderful. Tija has a book, I believe it's her first book, coming out, Keeping the House, with And Other Stories, who we have also interviewed, and you can also check out at the festival. Yeah, she's got her book coming out with them, and it's amazing. And so go pre-order Keeping the House. Once you watch the interview, you will want to too. I don't think you could not, after sort of spending 45 minutes listening to Tija, want to buy a book written by Tija. So after that, we have Sarah Aldazano. This was like a really obvious talk for me. So what happened is I really wanted to cover somebody who is on the syllabus for language students in the UK, because I thought that could be really useful for students to be able to sort of learn a little bit about behind the book. And on the syllabus there was one woman who really stood out, and that was Faiza Gwen. Faiza Gwen is French, and she is Algerian French, and she her book Kif Demar is about growing up. She it's sort of, none of her books are memoir, they're all fiction, but they were all very highly drawn on the communities in which she grew up, and they're really, really good. They're the kind of YA, I don't think they're technically classed as YA. I think we actually have a chat about this. So Sarah Aldazano is her translator and has been for a long time, and I think Sarah and I chat about the YA adult distinction. And they don't need to be categorised by any means, but yeah, they are a really wonderful read, very enjoyable. I learnt a lot. I learnt some new words. And Sarah is very insightful and has just had 16 years of translating Faiza, to learn her, to know her, and to think about her work and her books, and she works very hard to promote them. Then we have, after a little bit of Tija, after a little bit of Sarah, with Faiza Gwen, and then we have Adam Breeze from Science Solutions. So Adam's first language is BSL, and so that was interpreted by Colleen Collins, because unfortunately I do not sign BSL, and it was amazing. We just had a really good chat about everything relating to BSL, about accessibility, about making hearing places more accessible, about making places that are currently accessible to hearing people more accessible to deaf people, about the sort of about the language and sort of some of his favourite features of the language, and just like a general chit chat around it all really. I really, really enjoyed it, and I think it was really, Adam was so generous with his time and so thoughtful, and he gave so many like really good examples. If you're like interested in just learning a little bit about and around BSL, like I just can't recommend it highly enough. There's so much in it, and he's so he's so great. I really enjoyed that one. And then after that we have the wonderful Barbara Jenkins. Barbara Jenkins is one of those people who just sort of calms you a little bit when you come across her. And so she's just took up writing when she retired, I believe. Actually, maybe a little bit later than that even. She might be when she was 70 or when she was 60. And she just, I think she enjoys writing. And I think that shines through in her work. And she just writes for for its purpose, because she enjoys it. And in the interview, she sat in her house in Trinidad, and the breeze is blowing the curtain up, and it's like, oh, it's a little piece of peace. And so we talked around more. Well, I didn't talk. I got to lovely and listen to this one. This one is by Will again, chaired by Will again. Because it's part of our Creole series, and it's sort of in conjunction with People Tree Press again. So do go check them out. People Tree Press publish writing from the Caribbean, and they are really wonderful. Been going a really long time. Are based out of the wonderful Leeds, and are just delightful people, and doing some really solid work as well. Doing some really they publish a lot, and that's a really hard thing to do, and as a small team, and they really get books out there, and they so Barbara is just incredible. It's sort of the conversation talks around her work, in particular De Writer's Place, and talks about her use of Trinidadian Creole, also talks about just sort of Trinidad's linguistic history, and a little bit discusses around that, and it's a big warm hug. I hope you enjoy. Those are our 4 talks for today. TJ from Tilted Access Press, Sarah Aldazano on translating Pfizer Gwen, who might be on your French A-level syllabus, and if she's not, you should read her anyway, in English or in French, whatever you fancy. And you should listen and watch Adam Breeze from Science Solutions. And then finally, last but not least, Barbara Jenkins, whose book is out with People Tree Press. So give them all a watch. The highlights start now.
I would say Unexpected Vanilla by Soj. By Lee Hayami, translated by Soj. I loved working on that. I really loved working on that. It's just all my queer dreams in one go. They're just so... Yeah, I think those poems are they move between each other in a very effortless way. And I think, when I was looking at the team while they were working on the edits for it, just our Slack chat was just really excited. Sabah Ahmed's editor at Tilted, although Theodora and Deborah also are involved in that side. And it was just interesting seeing the way that every line break was bound into the conversation around translation. The copy edit was part of translation, and I'm very interested in that. I'm very interested in the pages and the layout of a text, and how that informs the conversation around translation. I think with those poems also, it was nice to see the way that people responded to them, and the way that they generated conversations around sexual fluidity and and also like occupying space. So, you know, you'll see a lot of like wave imagery, for example, and things like this, and like thinking about your body in relation to these like concrete but movable forces. I think it's very, I just I was very struck by it when I read it. It informs a lot of my personal work as well, which I think is something nice actually. A lot of people in Untitled Access, I think all of us, I'm not sure about Simon, but the rest of the team, I think we're all writers. And I feel like Simon's probably a secret writer too. And so I think we all are directly inspired by the work that we put out, which is nice. Most of it anyway. Like we can't all have the same favourites, of course.
Well, there's such a like a breadth to the work, and such a like I don't know how to say like the word that's coming to mind is deepness, and I don't think it's right. Like I kind of just mean that like Ito Harobe, Hamid Ismailov, you know, like these are like big writers. Like there are sort of, they really nicely complement people who like are maybe more like not contemporary, but they're a little bit younger. Basically, you know, it's like the difference between people who are like now in their 60s-ish and people who are now in their 20s and 30s. And like there's this like breadth of history there, and this like I don't know, I love that you guys don't just publish something that, you know, 2020, this only, you know, this was only, you know, it's yeah,
Like that from an archiving perspective as well. I think I think with Hamid's work, for example, some of it is older, like he wrote it, I think in Central Asia trilogy, which he's completing this year. We're putting out a title of his called Manashi.
pre-ordered.
Oh gosh, it's really good. I've read some of it.
I was talking with Faiza for a podcast that we're recording with Trafficker Europe recently, and we were reflecting on the fact that when I first met her in person, and I'd done my first draft of Kif Kif Demain by then, she was 19 and I was 35. And here we are now, 16 years later. So she is exactly the age that I was when I first met her. And I remember those were in the days still I used mini disc to record sound, and I recorded that whole interview. And we just had so much to talk about, because as a translator, you're the shrink of the text, in the sense that you've constantly got to analyze motivations as well as finding all sorts of creative linguistic solutions. And so I was writing an article about her for The Guardian. That was why I was interviewing her. But because I translated the book, and because we had this depth of knowledge between us, the interview just rolled and rolled for hours, and she couldn't believe the questions that I was probing. And it felt like a really deep conversation and a real meeting in terms of humor and curiosity about language, and a commitment to voices that aren't normally captured on the page, whether that's linguistically, whether that's because of demographics and geographical kind of off the radar spots. So yeah, that was the beginning of the journey that we went on, and here we are. Men Don't Cry comes out with Cassava Republic this summer, which I'm incredibly excited about, and we're just signing off on covers at the moment. And then next year, Discretion, Faiza's 6th novel, will be published, and I'm got the privilege of translating that for Saki Books. So it's been a long and an ever-evolving journey with Faiza.
Absolutely. So that journey that starts with Faiza when she's 19, and with Just Like Tomorrow, and then ends with, well, currently is up to Discretion. What, for people who maybe aren't familiar with Faiza's work, what is it that is particularly distinctive and particularly important that she's doing, and how has she changed? Because I think it's quite interesting. I think her writing gets tighter. I think it, you know, there's definitely a sort of, you know, like I can see a change in sort of some writing styles, but actually I think it's remarkable for how little it's changed from what I've read, from sort of Just Like Tomorrow and Dreams from the Ends and Men Don't Cry, and so that voice is still very much the same. And then I was wondering how you feel that you've changed as a translator, from Just Like Tomorrow to Discretion as well.
So there's a really simple answer to that, which is that I'm 16 years older, and that makes a big fat difference. And the same for Faiza. And so inevitably, you know, when she was starting out, Just Like Tomorrow was published when she was 19, but she'd been writing that from when she was 15, 16. So it was absolutely capturing the teenage voices, particularly from around her. And that's something that, you know, with time, you move on from. You're not going to get stuck in a time warp there. And the last thing you want to be is a geriatric in the wrong place. So that shifts. Something that Faiza was talking about recently is she's often asked who her literary influences have been. And of course, she can cite the writers who've really had an impact on her, especially as a young person. But I think she feels increasingly empowered to say that the real influences on her are the oral storytellers that she grew up with, particularly her aunts, who she would go and visit back in Algeria in the summer holidays. And that sort of power of storytelling, and it being a very democratic space, it being very funny, it being obliged to capture your attention because you can see instantly if you're not getting the reaction that you want. I think that's had the biggest impact on her. And I think what has stayed the same with her is the political commitment to getting people who are too often invisible in the mainstream visible, and getting their street names visible, and getting the names of the stadiums where they live visible, and kind of creating a roadmap for something to have a place.
Sometimes a lot of written information can be delivered in BSL very quickly and very succinctly, because in BSL, all those little words that don't mean very much in English don't really exist. And language works without it. There's an awful lot of written information that you could just delete from a page of writing and you'd still understand what's being said. So in sign language, we don't waste time with all of that. We just give you what you need and we create a visual picture. And that doesn't mean it doesn't mean it's a basic language, it doesn't mean we miss any detail. It's all there, but it's all in our body and in our face and how we present the signs. The other thing, a different area altogether, for example, if we drew on a piece of paper, in English, we would say a black car, wouldn't we? That's the order of how we would describe a car that's black, a black car. Now, in my mind, when I read that on a piece of paper, I've drawn a picture. Like I was saying before about the big boat, little boat, heavy rain, gentle rain. So if you said to somebody, a black car, a deaf person would draw a black car. But your visual image of what you imagined a black car to look like might be different. And also in BSL, so it might not look like the picture of a black car you were expecting. Whereas if I signed and gave you like a visual description of how the black car looks, in some ways, BSL is even more detailed than written English, where some people think it's a basic language. It really isn't. And we do switch things around. We switch the order of things. So if I was talking about a black car in BSL, I would say car black, because we always put the topic first, because the topic is where you immediately create the picture, right? So car, we know we're talking about a car, the detail comes later. And in written English, when you see lots of sentences, that's how we, translate that into very few signs without losing any detail whatsoever.
That's fantastic. I find it so interesting. With the boat and the rain, that I can see exactly what you're doing, and it is, like you say, a visual picture. That's perfect.
Exactly. It's a perfect language. BSL, British Sign Language. It's I'm trying to think of another example for you. Let me think. I think that what I'm trying to say, and I think you've got this already anyway, but deaf people live in a visual world. So they create a picture, and even a piece of paper, you can't make that picture move. You can't make that picture that exciting. I'm not saying you can't make a picture exciting, but in sign language, if you watch me sign what's drawn on a picture, it becomes like a whole new story. So I'll give you another example. We've got a mouse. We've got the word food, and we've got the word pizza. Mouse, food, pizza. Now, in your head, what are you seeing? What's the picture you're seeing? Because a deaf person will very likely see that different to you. You're given 3 words, and it's almost like directing a film. So mouse, eat, pizza. You can move those things around. So you could start with the picture of the pizza, couldn't you? And you could see the mouse approaching and eating the pizza. Or you could have the mouse walking and finding the pizza. So you can start with one or the other. You can have it either way around. And it might be that the mouse is the key part of your story. So the focus is the mouse. The pizza is not the important part. However, your story might be that it is all about the pizza. So in sign language, we get that across in a visual way as well, in a way that if you wrote those 3 words down on paper, it's not telling you anything. BSL is such an expressive language. It's such a rich, it's fantastic. I love my language. And I know it sounds silly talking about mice and pizzas, but, in my mind, I'm seeing, the mouse jump on the pizza, disappear inside the pizza. My mind is just so active with all these visual pictures, because that's my world. It's so expressive.
How did I come to write it in Creole? Well, I think it is situated in a bar in Belmont. Belmont is a suburb of Port-of-Spain and a very old part of Port-of-Spain. And in Belmont, there is a mix of people, but it is a lower middle class area. And what they would speak is Creole. So I think the setting dictated what language should be used there. So the book itself is entirely in Creole, unless it is, or in one of the Creoles, unless it is in the head of the one character there who didn't grow up in Trinidad. And then in her head, she's in standard English, but everyone else speaks a kind of Creole depending on lots of circumstances. So I think the setting dictated the language that should be used in the book.
It's interesting that you talk about kind of not just Creole, but Creoles plural. Could you talk a little bit about actually just the variety of Creoles that exist in Trinidad? You and I on a phone call recently went a little bit into the history of Trinidad and how that's influenced the language. And for those that don't know, would you mind just going into the varieties, because it is as specific as which particular crop plantation you're working on, right?
Right, to a very large extent it is, yes. When Columbus arrived in Trinidad, he met people here already. The first peoples were here, and they had their own language. Then Spanish was brought in, and everybody who was here, a very small population, spoke Spanish or a version of Spanish. Then we had the French arrive. The French arrived by invitation from the Spanish rulers. During the time of the French Revolution, people who lived up the islands who were French were invited to come to Trinidad, which was largely unpopulated at the time. They were invited to settle, provided they were white, Catholic, and swore allegiance to Spain. They were given huge grants of land, and the land they were given depended on who they were. Each man, woman, and child was given 32 acres, but also on the number of slaves they brought. So the enslaved people, by their very presence, earned land grants for their owners. And the population that arrived spoke French, or a kind of French that would have been mixed with African, the origin of the enslaved peoples. So we had those layers going on there, Spanish, French happening. If you were into cocoa in the valleys, there'd be kind of Spanish, French speaking. Then the British came, enslavement ended with emancipation, and they brought in people from British India, mainly from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. And they spoke Bhojpuri, which is a variant of Hindi. And they brought their own language. Now, unlike the enslaved Africans, the Indians were allowed to keep their language, their religion, their customs, and they were indentured. So they were going to serve for a period of time and perhaps go back, or given a grant of land to stay. So they had language retention there. But of course, they learned English, which was the way the colony at the time communicated. And from whom did they learn English? They learned English from the freed Africans who lived nearby. So Bhojpuri crept into the language, and English crept into the Bhojpuri. So this huge amalgam of location, origin, determined Creoles. Of course, additionally, you had class playing a huge role. The educated classes would speak a variety of English that would be more recognizable as standard English. And the lower orders would speak a Creole, and, depending on their class. I don't know if that answers your question fully enough, but there are many Creoles. And in De Ruyter's place, age, of course, plays a difference too. The older people would speak a Creole that was set in the 40s and 50s with a lot of French patois in it, and have a different vocabulary. Younger people would speak a different Creole that would have influences from American movies, and from modern technology, language they pick up from texting, language they pick up from social media and so on. Yeah, so there are age differences in the Creole as well.
What else shall I say? What else do I need to talk about? Have you listened to our playlist yet? We've got a playlist that'll accompany your afternoon. We've also got music from James Ward, music from Eleanor coming up soon. Have you checked out our artist in residence? Have you checked out our bookshop? You should go look at those. Yeah.